It was a Saturday morning when I found the side door to my barn hanging off its hinges and a trail of muddy boot prints leading inside. That's never a good sign. Especially not in Ridgewell Acres, where the HOA thinks they're the FBI. I'm Kellen Zaid, a former livestock inspector turned small farm owner. After 20 years of wrangling red tape for the state, I decided to retire early and raise goats, chickens, and a couple of rescue donkeys on the outskirts of suburbia. My property sits on the edge of the neighborhood, technically within the HOA boundary, but I had all my zoning, animal, and agricultural permits in place before I even bought the land. And yet there I was, standing in front of my ransacked barn, staring at three self-important people in khaki polos and clipboards, poking around like they had a warrant. They didn't. "Halt," one of them barked, holding up a laminated badge that read Ridgewell Acres HOA Ranger. It looked like something a 12-year-old would make for a cosplay convention. The ringleader was a woman I recognized immediately, Halcyra Jennings, the HOA president from hell. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was on her way to a golf club meeting she wasn't invited to. She had the kind of face that looked permanently offended. "Mr. Zaid," she said, looking down her nose at me. "We received anonymous reports of animal mistreatment, excessive livestock, foul odors. We are authorized by the board to investigate possible violations of HOA Regulation 42B. By breaking into my barn," I said, stepping between her and one of my goats, who looked more confused than scared. "This structure is within Ridgewell Acres jurisdiction," she said sharply. "And your barn exceeds the square footage for secondary outbuildings. Furthermore, we suspect you have more than the allowed number of hooved animals." I nearly laughed. "You're quoting guidelines that don't apply to agriculturally zoned land. And you're trespassing." "We have authority granted by the HOA charter," Halcyra snapped, "which isn't the same as a legal warrant, and you know it," I said. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the broken latch, the boot prints, and the three of them standing in the middle of my barn like they were on a safari. One of the rangers, a weaselly guy with a clipboard and a badge that said Deputy Water Use Monitor, looked uncomfortable. "We're just trying to keep the neighborhood safe," he mumbled. "From what, happy goats?" I said. "You know what this is about, don't you?" Halcyra narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me. You've been itching to get me out since I moved in." "Ever since I refused to replace my natural wood fencing with white vinyl. Ever since I told you I wouldn't be joining the optional HOA beautification committee. You tried fining me $500 for having a rooster that doesn't even exist. There were noise complaints," she said. "My rooster is a wind chime shaped like a chicken." She flushed red but didn't back down. "Regardless, we've documented several violations. This barn will be reported to the board for demolition review." I stared at her. "You're trying to condemn my barn because you don't like goats. Because you're out of compliance," she said smugly. I took a deep breath, walked to the cabinet near the feed bins, and pulled out the thick blue folder I kept there for situations exactly like this. I flipped it open and held out a stack of papers. "This is my agricultural exemption from county zoning. This one's my livestock permit. This is a USDA certificate for animal welfare. And this," I said, tapping the top page, "is a signed letter from the county commissioner confirming my land was grandfathered in before Ridgewell Acres was ever platted." The HOA rangers looked at the documents like they were written in Sanskrit. Halcyra snatched them from my hand, flipping through them with jerky movements. These can't override HOA regulations," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "They override the HOA entirely," I said. "I don't fall under your jurisdiction. I never did. You've been harassing me illegally for months." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "And now you broke into my barn, damaged my property, entered without permission, without notice, and without cause. That's a criminal trespass and unlawful entry, possibly even burglary, depending on how the DA sees it." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "Oh, I would," I said, "and I've got the footage to back it up." I pointed at the tiny black dome set into the rafters. "Security camera, cloud-backed. Everything you did this morning, recorded." The clipboard guy actually paled. Halcyra looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. You'll be hearing from our attorney, she snapped. I'll be hearing from yours, I said. Lady, you're going to be hearing from mine. They left in a hurry, trying to look dignified while stepping around goat droppings. I waited until they were out of sight, then locked the barn and called the sheriff. Deputy Morris showed up 20 minutes later, listened to the story, reviewed the footage, and raised his eyebrows so high they nearly vanished under his hat. Well, he said, this is going to be fun. He took my statement, took the video files, and promised to file a report with the county DA's office. I knew it wouldn't be instant, nothing legal ever is, but I could feel the shift in the air. The HOA had finally overplayed its hand. And I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to take the whole rotten system down. By Monday morning, the energy around Ridgewell Acres had shifted like a river changing course. News traveled fast in our neighborhood, especially when the HOA president and her 2 poorly named rangers had been caught breaking into someone's barn. I hadn't said a word to anyone besides Deputy Morris and my attorney, but somehow the gossip channels had already lit up. I was mucking out the donkey pen, trying to clear my head, when I heard a soft, "Hey, Kellen." It was Teresa Mendoza, who lived across the street with her 3 kids and mother. She was holding a basket of something wrapped in a kitchen towel. I brought banana bread, she said, offering it like a peace treaty. I figured you might want something sweet after, you know, the incident. I wiped my gloves on my pants and took the basket. Thanks, Teresa. Appreciate it. I saw Halcyra stomping past my driveway Saturday like someone had kicked her yacht. You okay? I'm fine. I've got security footage and the sheriff's office has it now. This isn't going away quietly, she nodded. Good. Because most of us are sick of her acting like she owns the zip code. I raised an eyebrow. Most of you, she hesitated. There's a meeting tonight, emergency session, board called it. Supposed to be just for internal discussion, but people are talking about showing up anyway. What are they discussing? Rumor is, expulsion votes, not just for you, for others too. They're trying to reclassify certain homes as non-compliant assets. I frowned. That's not even a legal term. Exactly, she said, but they've been throwing it around like it means something. You might want to come. I made up my mind right then. That evening, I walked into the Ridgewell Acres Community Hall wearing clean jeans and a collared shirt, no cowboy hat. No boots, just a man with a folder under his arm and a reason to be there. The room was packed. Fold-out chairs filled the space, and even the back wall had people leaning against it. I spotted a few familiar faces. Teresa, her oldest son Marco, the elderly couple who sold me eggs before I had my own hens, and the guy who drove the ice cream truck in the summer. All of them looked tense. At the front sat the HOA board. Halcyra was flanked by 2 other board members, Claude Remmer, who always wore loafers without socks, and Doreen Pike, whose expression suggested she disapproved of air. Halcyra banged a wooden gavel on the table. This emergency session of the Ridgewell Acres Homeowners Association is now in order. The agenda concerns infractions and community safety. She launched into a speech about preserving neighborhood standards and protecting shared values, but I wasn't listening. I was watching the man standing quietly near the back wall, Deputy Morris in uniform. When Halcyra finally opened the floor, I stood. I'd like to address the board, I said. She didn't even look up. Public comment is not on the agenda. Then change the agenda, said a voice near the back. Someone clapped, then someone else. Halcyra's lip twitched. Fine. But be brief. I walked to the front and placed my folder on the table. On Saturday morning, 3 individuals acting under the title HOA Rangers entered my private property without permission. They damaged my barn door and entered without notice, warrant, or cause. They claimed to be investigating animal mistreatment, yet they had no legal authority to do so. Claude leaned forward. We received complaints. Complaints don't grant you entry, and you know it. I turned and addressed the room. For those wondering, my property is zoned agricultural. I have every permit in place, county, state, and federal. I do not fall under HOA jurisdiction regarding land use or livestock. That's not opinion, that's law. I turned back to the board. You broke it. You entered my barn. You damaged my property. Halcyra sniffed. You're escalating a minor inspection. Deputy Morris stepped forward. Actually, ma'am, that's what I'm here to clarify. Every head in the room turned. The sheriff's office has reviewed the footage. Mr. Zaid's barn was entered without consent. The individuals involved made physical contact with private property and removed a latch. That constitutes trespassing and property damage under county law. We've opened a formal investigation. A ripple spread through the crowd. Claude stood up. Now hold on, this is a misunderstanding. We're a governing body. You're a homeowners association, Morris said calmly, not a law enforcement agency, and you've overstepped. Halcira turned red. This is outrageous. We were acting in the interest of the community. Then the community deserves better, someone shouted from the back. Doreen rose. We'd like to take a recess to confer. No recess, I said. You already made your decisions. You called an emergency meeting to discuss removing homeowners, based on false accusations. Based on supposed violations from people you don't even have jurisdiction over. I opened my folder again and laid out a copy of my building permit, livestock registration, and the commissioner's letter. Here's proof of my exemption. And here, I said, pulling out a second folder, are copies of every complaint filed against me in the last 2 months, all anonymous, all citing fabricated issues. I turned to the crowd again. You know what they accused me of? Running a goat fighting ring. Someone laughed. Then 2 more people did. They said my donkey was dangerous, that my chickens were unvaccinated. Teresa murmured, my God. I've had enough, and I know many of you have too, so here's what I'm doing. I've filed a complaint with the county. I've requested a full review of Ridgewell Acres HOA practices. Their use of funds, their legal standing, their abuse of power, Doreen gasped. And I'm not alone. Several of you have shared your own stories, the bogus citations, the threats of foreclosure. The fines for things that aren't even in the bylaws. I looked back at Halcira. You overreached, and now it's going public. Halcira opened her mouth, but Deputy Morris cut in. Actually, ma'am, I'd advise against speaking further. You're named in the report. The room went silent. Claude blurted out, this is a witch hunt. No, said a voice near the window. It's a reckoning. The room erupted. I stepped back as people began shouting over each other. Some demanded resignations. Others demanded refunds. Someone yelled about a missing community garden fund. It was chaos, but the kind of chaos that shakes loose the rot. I slipped out quietly, banana bread still in my truck. The night air felt crisp. Lighter, back at the farm, I fed the goats under a sky full of stars. They nuzzled me like they knew something had changed, and they were right. The winds had turned. On Thursday morning, I was up before sunrise, hauling a fresh bale of hay to the donkey enclosure when a metallic clink at the end of my driveway made me pause. I rounded the corner just in time to see a city maintenance truck installing a new post beside my mailbox. A metal plate gleamed in the morning light. Notice of pending property assessment parcel division review. I set the hay down slowly. Morning, I called. The worker glanced up, friendly enough. Just following orders. This came down from Ridgewell Acres HOA, but it got routed through the city permit office somehow. They filed a request to have your land reassessed for potential subdivision. My jaw tensed. They used city channels. Looks like it, he said, tapping a tablet. Filed under a community redevelopment clause. Weird thing, though it's marked as a city-backed initiative, but the contact info lists a private firm. Something called Juno Holdings. I thanked him, waited until he left, and then walked back to the house, heart pounding. I'd never heard of Juno Holdings, but my gut didn't like the sound of it. I pulled up the county assessor's portal, entered my parcel number, and there it was, an active request to split my land into 3 residential development units, filed 2 days ago. I grabbed my phone and called the county records office. After a 20-minute wait, someone finally confirmed what I feared. The request hadn't come from the city. It was submitted through a third-party planning consultant, one the HOA had apparently contracted without notice to the community. I didn't waste time. I called my attorney, Harper, who didn't even try to hide her alarm. They're attempting to reclassify your land through a loophole that only applies to abandoned properties or unincorporated zones, she said, which yours isn't. This is beyond overreach, Kellen, it's fraud. She offered one piece of advice: dig deeper before we act. If they were trying to take my land, they'd leave a paper trail. I spent the rest of the day combing through county filings, pulling up every permit, motion, and third-party contract Ridgewell Acres had approved in the last year. What I found made the back of my neck go cold. Buried in a batch of scanned PDFs from 4 months ago was a motion labeled Community Parcel Optimization Initiative. It had no signatures from residents, no vote logs, and no meeting minutes attached. But it authorized the HOA board to explore redevelopment options for underutilized parcels. The motion was tied to 3 properties: mine, a vacant lot owned by a retired firefighter, and a small rental home at the edge of the subdivision. I checked the LLC listed as the managing partner, Juno Holdings. I called Teresa. "You remember that meeting where the board said they were applying for neighborhood grants?" I asked. "Yeah." They said it was for park benches and irrigation improvements. They filed a redevelopment initiative instead. They're trying to turn parts of the neighborhood into infill housing, probably to sell to developers. Wait. They want to slice up your land. They filed a subdivision request 2 days ago. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was tight. "You know they're not just playing HOA games anymore, right? This is theft." That evening, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find a man in his early 40s, dressed in a dark gray suit, holding a leather briefcase. "Mr. Zaid," he said, offering a business card. "My name is Corbin Lyle. I represent Juno Holdings. I'd like to discuss a purchase offer for your property." I didn't invite him in. "You filed a subdivision request on my land without my consent." He smiled, professional but hollow. "You were named in a redevelopment initiative approved by the Ridgewell Acres HOA. We're working with them under a legally binding contract. There's nothing legal about manipulating zoning laws and falsifying community consent. We have documents on file indicating board approval," he said. "If you choose not to sell voluntarily, there are other mechanisms." Eminent domain under private-public partnerships is becoming quite common. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Eminent domain requires a government agency. Technically, the HOA charter allows them to act as a municipal agent under certain conditions. I stepped closer. "You came to the wrong farm." Corbin's smile didn't flicker, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. "I'd advise consulting your attorney before reacting emotionally. The offer is generous, well above market." "You're trespassing," I said. "And next time, don't bother knocking." He left without another word. That night, Harper and I compiled everything: the false filings, the unauthorized contract with Juno, the subdivision request. She sent it all to the County Development Board and submitted a demand for immediate investigation. But we both knew things were already past the point of quiet resolutions. The following morning brought more fuel to the fire. Deputy Morris called me just after breakfast. "Got something you need to see," he said. "It's about your barn break-in." When I arrived at the sheriff's substation, he led me to a small conference room. On the table was a laptop, paused on a still frame from my barn's security footage, but it wasn't the footage I'd already seen. "This came from the cloud backup," he said. "We pulled a wider feed angle. You're going to want to watch the last 2 minutes." He hit play. The footage showed Halcira and her 2 cronies lingering by my feed cabinet after I walked off screen. Halcira opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a thick envelope, and quickly tucked it into her purse. The timestamp was clear. It happened moments after I'd stepped outside. Morris paused the video. "You keep cash in your barn." "No," I said, but that envelope was full of vet records. Originals. Signed by the state livestock vet. "She took them." "Looks like it." He exhaled slowly. "We're upgrading the case. It's not just trespassing anymore, it's theft of official documents. And with her position on the HOA board, it could be prosecuted under abuse of fiduciary duty." "What does that mean for her?" "If the DA pursues it, and I think he will, she's looking at felony charges." By mid-afternoon, a legal storm had broken over Ridgewell Acres. The county issued a temporary freeze on all HOA-initiated zoning requests while they reviewed the redevelopment filings. The sheriff's office announced an active investigation into criminal misconduct by HOA board members. And a notice went out to the community. An emergency town hall would be held at the high school auditorium that Saturday. I spent the next 2 days preparing, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been bullied, fined, or pushed around by the board. Teresa and Marco canvassed the neighborhood, gathering statements. A local contractor came forward with proof he'd been asked to bid on demolition services for a non-compliant structure that matched the dimensions of my barn 3 weeks before the inspection ever took place. The auditorium was packed by the time I arrived. Not just homeowners, but local press, city officials, and a state representative who'd heard about the attempted land grab. Halcira was nowhere to be seen. Claude and Doreen sat stiffly at a table near the stage, looking like they'd aged 10 years in 3 days. The county commissioner took the podium first. "We have reviewed the filings submitted by the Ridgewell Acres HOA regarding redevelopment initiatives," he said. "Our legal team has concluded that these filings were submitted without proper authorization, without public notice, and in violation of county planning procedures." He turned to the crowd. "As of this moment, all redevelopment efforts initiated by Ridgewell Acres HOA are suspended indefinitely. Furthermore, the county has opened a formal audit of the HOA board's financial and operational conduct." Applause erupted. People stood. Some shouted their thanks. I didn't speak until the commissioner yielded the podium. Then I stepped up, folder in hand, and addressed the room. "This isn't just about me," I said. "It's about a board that thought no one would fight back, that they could bend the rules, twist the law, and call it governance." I held up the vet records copies this time. They stole evidence. They lied on official filings. And they tried to sell land they didn't own. I looked at the crowd. But they made one mistake. Everyone went quiet. They assumed we didn't know our rights, that we'd stay quiet, that we'd roll over, but we didn't. A roar of approval rose from the audience, louder than before. People clapped, whistled, even stomped their feet. That night, as I walked back to my truck, Teresa caught up to me. "They're going to dissolve the board," she said. "Replace it with a community council. With actual checks and votes. About time. You started something, Kellen." I looked out over the neighborhood, the moonlight catching on rooftops and fences and porch lights. "No," I said. "We all did." The morning after the town hall, I woke up to find a county vehicle idling at the edge of my driveway. A woman in a gray blazer stood beside it, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the perimeter of my property like it was a crime scene. I stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and called out before she could set foot past the gate. "You'll want to announce yourself before walking in. It's been a busy week." She looked up and gave a short nod. "No intention of crossing your line without permission, Mr. Zaid." "I'm with the county auditor's office. My name's Fallon Rudd." I motioned her in with a tilt of my chin. She walked the gravel path carefully, pausing to glance at the barn, my feed bins, and the chicken coop beyond the fence. "I won't take up much of your time," she said. "I'm here to verify property usage claims against Ridgewell Acres HOA filings. Their redevelopment proposals were flagged for falsified assessments, and your parcel was central to that. We're reviewing all documents they submitted under their charter authority." I handed her a folder I'd already prepared. Every inspection, license, and letter since I bought the land. Dated, signed, and notarized. Fallon flipped through the papers quickly but efficiently, her eyes narrowing in focus. "These match nothing in the documents we were given. According to their submission, your land was listed as undeveloped with no active agricultural use. They even included photos of an empty lot." "That's not just a lie," I said. "That's fabrication." "They submitted those photos to the Department of Community Development," she said, "and attached a list of properties they claimed were vacant or in violation of county standards. Yours, the Barstow lot, and the Gelner cottage were all marked for potential seizure via code enforcement if not sold voluntarily. They tried to strong-arm people with false compliance threats." "They did more than try," Fallon said quietly. "We have reason to believe some of the anonymous complaints they used to justify those filings were authored by board members themselves." I didn't ask how she knew. I could tell by the way her jaw tightened that she wasn't speculating. "Anything you need from me," I said, "you'll have it." She gave a firm nod and turned to leave, pausing only once to glance at the goats by the fence. "They look pretty well treated to me," I smiled. "They're living better than most politicians." By that evening, the county had released a formal suspension of Ridgewell Acres HOA's charter authority, pending investigation. But that wasn't the final nail. That came 2 days later, when Harper forwarded me a sealed affidavit from a former HOA treasurer who had resigned 6 months prior. Her name was Annette Gable, and she hadn't spoken publicly since stepping down until now. The affidavit was 23 pages long, detailing how Halcira had repeatedly bypassed board votes by creating emergency proxies for absentee members. Annette claimed she'd witnessed Halcira forge signatures on at least 3 separate budget reallocations, including one that transferred over $20,000 from the Community Maintenance Fund into a consulting reserve used to pay Juno Holdings' retainer. Even worse, the document revealed that the board had approved private surveillance contracts unbeknownst to residents, authorizing the installation of license plate readers and motion-triggered cameras at subdivision entrances. The footage was stored off-site, outside of HOA jurisdiction, in servers leased by a private security firm managed by Claude Remmer's son. Harper sent the affidavit straight to the DA's office. The fallout was immediate. Within 48 hours, sheriff's deputies served warrants on the HOA office and both Claude and Doreen's homes. Halcira had already emptied her desk days earlier, but they found enough in the office safe to put her name back at the top of the warrant list. The safe contained a ledger with handwritten notes detailing strategy sessions for parcel acquisition, including a section labeled ZAID, provoke compliance violation, apply pressure, offer buyout. When I read that line, it didn't make me angry, it made me resolute. The county filed charges within the week: conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of public records, and misuse of public trust authority. More were expected as the investigation unfolded. Halcira was arrested while leaving a boutique real estate seminar in a neighboring city. Claude tried claiming ignorance, but the email trail Harper uncovered showed he'd been signing off on Juno contracts for months. That Saturday, the neighborhood gathered again, this time not in anger, but in relief. The meeting was held at the community park, under wide canvas tents set up by volunteers. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, not rows. People brought crockpots and coolers. Kids chased each other between picnic tables. I stood beside Teresa and Marco, watching as a group of residents organized a table for a community vote. No official titles, no power trips, just neighbors deciding what they wanted their future to look like. Teresa nudged me. "You going to run for committee?" "Not a chance," I said. "But I'll keep the goats ready in case we need security." She laughed and handed me a cup of lemonade. "You know what's funny? I used to be scared of those board meetings, afraid that if I spoke up, they'd fine us into foreclosure." "They banked on that fear," I said. "But fear's a short-term weapon. Community, that's long-term." Marco approached with a clipboard. "They're proposing a bylaw that prevents any future board from entering into private deals without a 2/3 resident vote. Want to sign?" I did. The new council was elected that afternoon. No one ran unopposed. Every position had at least 2 candidates, and everyone had to speak for 3 minutes about what transparency meant to them. The difference between that and what we had just weeks ago was night and day. Later that night, I returned home to find a small envelope tucked in my front gate. No name, just a folded note inside. "Thank you for not backing down, a neighbor." I didn't recognize the handwriting. I didn't need to. I tucked it into the same folder that had once held my permits, the one that now held court filings, affidavits, and video capture logs. A record of everything we'd fought against, and the barn door had been repaired. The feed bins were full. The goats were healthy. The sky above Ridgewell Acres was wide and quiet again. There were no more rangers, no more secret filings, and no more silence.